cracking into the third hour of the JSB on a Sunday. And you know how it works. We ask our guest to choose a song, and it's only once I start to tell you who the guest is and what they do that you might realize why. Well, I certainly thought, why did he choose that particular song? And then I started to think about the band. Dr. Hook is the band, and the song is a cover of the Rolling Stone. Our guest is Allan Oates. He's a medical orthotist, prosthetist, partner at something called Barclay & Oates. So talking about prosthetics, what do we mean by prosthetics? Well, over the holidays, I saw this incredible video, and it was in fact Allan Oates who was in the video, working with a small child who had suddenly been given not suddenly, well, it was the first time the child had been given a prosthetic leg. Obviously, the child had lost her leg for some or other reason. And the video, short video, was of Allan working with this young girl, young. I mean, she couldn't have been more than 6, I think. Well, Allan will tell us more. Pushing a chair across the room and suddenly being able to walk and push the chair. And I started to think about the people who make our lives different. For those of us who may be amputees, etc. So just for your reference, it's estimated that globally there are 65 million people living with limb amputations. And this is according to a study by the African Journal of Disability. So what happens? And in South Africa, how do we deal with it? Many amputees are unable to afford having a new prosthetic limb put on. So how do they get made? What are the costs? Must be massive of this particular medical help support. And how does it work? Allan Oates, thank you so much for joining us.
No, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So Allan, let's start with what it is that you do broadly.
Okay, so in prosthetics, like you said, is the manufacture of artificial limbs or any external prosthesis. And the orthotics is any external splinting, so from back braces to foot supports for athletes, from the old days in polio, those irons you see on people's legs for polio. So that's the orthotics and prosthetics breakdown.
So the video that I saw was of you working with a very small child, which made me think, how does this work? Tell us how it works that you would create a prosthetic leg for a small child. It's hard to imagine.
So the reason for amputations vary a lot. So sometimes it's burn patients, that in babies that fall foul to whichever water, oil, cooking pots, things that they get burnt beyond repair, then they have to have an amputation to save them. In that case, that was a little child that we saw was, she's never known walking on her own legs. She only knows walking on a prosthesis, and it's so rewarding. So I choke up sometimes when I talk about it. But to have the privilege to do something for them that she, and you can't give her instructions. She's too young to take instruction. So she has to just put it on, let her go. And in her case, it's quite a humorous side to that story is she lived with her granny. And when she got the prosthesis and started walking, and when she got too busy, the granny would take the prosthesis away, put it on top of the cupboard, and they'd all have a few hours rest and then give it back to her and off they'd go again. So.
But you say that it does choke you up. And actually, when I saw this video, it choked me up as well. And that's why I kind of went to our team and I said, look, we need to think about this because it's a whole world that perhaps we've never had the opportunity to engage with. I mean, for a child how old is that child?
That child's at walking age at 2 when we started it there, just under 2.
So how does that process work then? So you are now, because obviously the child is growing, so constantly you would have to shift and change her prosthetic leg in terms of her walking process. I mean, this is a life. I mean, you are going to be bound emotionally. You say it chokes you up. You're going to be bound emotionally to this child and her journey through the world until she's a full-grown adult.
Definitely. And the sad part is that it also all comes with costs. So people are under the impression that you walk into an orthotist, prosthetist practice, they open a cupboard, they look at you, small, medium, large, take it off the shelf, and off you go. But there's a massive process in making prostheses. And in this case, every 6 months to a year, the part that the little patient's stump or residual limb fits into needs to be changed. So it's a continuous thing. And even in adults, it's not a case of you get one, it lasts you for life. It's always needs to be replaced as your body changes, as things go on. So it's exactly that. You need to build a relationship for the rest of your time with your prosthetist, and even with patients. If you don't have a good relationship with your prosthetist, find somebody else that you can build a relationship with, because you're in for the long haul.
So let's talk about that long haul, and let's use this young girl, 2 years old. She comes to you. She has lost her one limb, her leg, and now you need to figure out. Talk to us about the making of the prosthetics and take us further in that journey.
Okay, so in the case of the young girl, so first we start off by taking a cast of her residuum of her stump. And that is 99% of the time we do it with plaster Paris. Some technologies going now, people scan, but it's not a be all and end all. But anyway, so it's take the cast of the stump, and that gets modified. So there's certain areas that you can take weight on, and certain areas that you need to relieve pressure on. And we make what we call a diagnostic socket. So that's out of a thick plastic material that you can still heat and adjust slightly. And we fit that prosthesis on the patient, and they walk on that for anything, depending on the practitioner, from a few hours to a few weeks or a few months even. And at that point, on the patient's first prosthesis, they don't know how to walk. So you can't see, we joke about doing the wheel alignment. You can't see how the patient walks. So you've got to give them time on it with certain instruction, and in our ideal world, some physio guidance and things like that. And then only after time you can see, okay, the foot in relation to the knee is not in the right line, or the foot in relation to it is not lined properly. So when the person walks, their knee goes into knock knee or bow leg, or whichever way it goes, or they can't get over the front part of the foot properly. And those are continuous things. You come in weekly or every few days and adjust until the whole stump settle down, and we're confident that we're in the best place we can be. And then we go into a finished prosthesis, and we make the prosthesis like that. So it's a process over weeks and months, more than hours and days.
Sometimes people, I imagine, and certainly if it's a small child, are not going to be able to tell you it's painful or it hurts. How do you engage in that kind of conversation?
So in the children, it's difficult because that little girl couldn't really even talk properly. She couldn't communicate. She's too young. But so you've got to visualize. It's a long process, and with us, there's often a language gap. There's a communication problem. These little kids are often semi-abandoned. They're living with a granny or in a home or something. So there's got to be a lot of explanation into the group around that child, is to physically look at that stump every day or twice a day and see, is it changing color? Are there problems? And if the child rejects the prosthesis often, that's a warning sign saying that it's hurting. So you've got to just give it to them and let them play with it and let them get on, and eventually they will ask for it, and then they get on and put it in. Then you 90% down the line if they want it, because they can suddenly see, okay, now I can be mobile, I can do things.
What are prosthetics made of? I mean, I remember when I was doing my master's, one of the case studies we looked at was a prosthetics company in India, where they were looking at the issue of skin color and prosthetics. How does that get made? We Oscar.
Yes.
Yeah, he had the metal prosthetics. He didn't have something that looked like a foot at all. Blade Runner.
Carbon, yeah.
So how are they made, and what do they look like?
Okay, so the part generally there are always little tweaks, but generally the part that the person's body fits into is made out of fiberglass, different types of layers of cottons, fiberglass, or carbon fiber, sometimes carbon fiber reinforcing. And that can get in the outer layers, you can put a pigment into that resin. So you can get a close-ish color to match somebody's skin tone within degrees. There are highly specialized people in our industry, I'm not one of them, who make cosmetic covers for prosthesis, where they sit and they detail every little freckle on your skin and think if that's the person's requirement.
Yeah.
And some people place a lot more emphasis on cosmetic looks and others want more function. So you've got to find that balance. But there are in South Africa, there are a couple of sort of highly skilled people who can do that, what you call high definition.
And would that be made out of a kind of rubber?
Silicone, yes.
A silicone.
Silicone, yeah. And that's hours of sitting with a person, matching each little place and each little spot and each color tone. And
fantastic. Allan, we need to go to a break, but when we come back from a break, I want to talk to you about 3D printing and the possibilities of technology as we move forward into the future, if we can.
The four Spanish giants athletic club battles.
We're talking something different in our guest presenter today. We're looking at the concept of prosthetics. And as I mentioned up front in the interview, it was brought to my attention by a video someone sent me of a man who is a prosthetist or an orthotist, and he works with both children and adults, forming relationships with them, and then, of course, having to work with their prosthetic limbs if they have lost a limb, maybe it's been amputated. And in particular, it was a video of a very small child who had its very first prosthetic limb, and as Allan Oates, our guest, had said, the child, it was the first time she was actually walking ever. So, 2-year-old getting up off the ground and suddenly learning to walk and pushing a chair around the room. And it actually brought tears to my eyes because it just was an extraordinary example of renewal. We've been talking about renewal throughout the show, and that was an extraordinary example of renewal. Allan, the opportunities to get a prosthetic limb must be difficult and expensive in this country, and I'm sure many people don't have access to that. I'd like to just try and figure out what are the costs of things like this to make something of this nature, and then let's talk about the role of technology as we move forward into the future.
Okay, so the cost is a very difficult thing to answer. It's like buying a car, in the sense that you can get a little entry-level car, whatever. I'm not a car person, like a little Uno or something like that, or you can get up into the Rolls Royces, and that's the same with prosthetics. But the most expensive isn't always the best for that individual.
Yeah.
So, for example, the running prostheses that Oscar used to run on, they're perfect for running, but they're not great for walking around on.
No.
And if you're an 80-year-old person that's amputated for diabetes, you want a nice soft foot that just rolls over and helps you in your daily activities, and you're not going to mountain climb and rock climb and do all sorts of things. So yeah, it's horses for courses. You need to, and in the Bologna, I'm very hesitant to get into cost because it's a minefield of problems, and the cost of a prosthesis is based on 3 basic things. So the one is for the person to make it, my skill and my whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
The other part is the components in it. So if it's the foot or the type of knee that's in it. And then the other part is what keeps it on the person's body. And those things all add up to make the final total as to what the prosthesis is. Yeah.
So the first would be the cost of the person who's actually making the prosthesis.
Yes.
The second would be the type of foot or knee, or it could also be, I suppose, an elbow or an arm.
Yes, exactly.
Okay,
yes.
An elbow or an arm.
And a hand, yeah.
Yeah, I mean elbow or hand, actually, is what I was thinking. And then the third would be the attachment.
Yes.
Why is the attachment so critical?
The attachment is, for example, in the old days, for that little child, people amputated below the knee.
Yeah.
There would be a strap attached to that prosthesis, and the strap would go above the knee joint and just get tightened around the knee joint. And that would keep it on. And then the tightness of the strap, you'll see old patients, there's a narrow little skinny piece above the knee because the tightness of the strap affects the muscles and their function. And if the leather or the straps elongate, every time the person lifts their leg up, the prosthesis drops down a centimeter or 2. Then they stand and it compresses a centimeter or 2 back into the prosthesis, and you get this pistoning action all the time. So the more positive you can have the attachment onto the body, the better the proprioception, the better the function, the better things can, it works.
You mentioned, that someone who is 80 with diabetes is not someone who is rock climbing or mountain climbing. Do you have anybody who's mountain climbing with a prosthesis?
Not in our practice, but I mean, there are worldwide. There are people. We've had a patient not rock climbing as such, but you walked up Kilimanjaro with a above knee amputee. But sure. Rock climbing as a sport, there are definitely amputees. There are groups that do that rock face climbing, and then again adapted feet that are very hard, so you can stand on the smallest little edge of a rock and keep your balance. Or there's a rubber foot which just fold out the way, and you hope your friend catches you.
Oh, geez, Allan, you mentioned right up front about how it is a very emotional job that you do, and certainly there must be times where you think this is. I'm so lucky, or sometimes I feel like I just can't get this right. What have been some of the real highlights for you over the years in terms of the kinds of people that you've worked with, the kinds of prosthetics that you've made for them?
I think it's a lot. Obviously, everybody, you look at the glory, you look at the active amputees, and you have a person that says this person did X, Y, and Z, or this person can do this or that. But you look down to, there's some really patients that are really affected. I had one older lady that was diabetic on dialysis, daily on dialysis, and the surgeons had amputated her foot, and so she'll never walk. And with perseverance, she walked. She became independent in her own home, and she used one of those 4-wheel walkers to go to the mall. And sure. that's not an amazing result, as in there's no Olympic records involved or anything like that. But from somebody who's had no hope, they're going to be bound, in a wheelchair for the rest of your life to have independence in your own home. You can make yourself a cup of tea. You can go to the toilet by yourself independently. So it's amazing things like that just make difference in people's lives.
Allan, I suppose in closing, how supportive is the Department of Health in this? What kind of support do you get? Because this is something, that if you don't have medical aid, I can imagine is super expensive. And so the question is, how does that happen?
So in theory, there are some of the leading hospitals throughout the state hospitals in the country that do provide prosthetic service. And that I think unfortunately it depends on how that particular hospital, how that centre is managed. So sometimes you might wait. We hear stories, it's not factual, but sometimes you might wait 2-3 months for prosthesis, which isn't bad at all, or years. So you get cast, you get measured, and you get the prosthesis 18 months later. It's not going to fit you anymore. So the whole cycle becomes a bit of a horrible thing. But so that's if you're an indigent patient and you have to rely on the state, there are avenues. Some are a little bit harder to access than others, but there are avenues within reason for prosthetic service.
Yeah.
And then in private medical aids, and in South Africa, probably the very high-end prosthetics, the $1 million up level, is probably mostly funded by things like the Road Accident Fund that settled in a court case that the state is now, the fund is obligated to reimburse you for that level of prosthesis.
And you make them all here in South Africa?
So the components aren't made locally. So the feet, the knees, and things like that aren't made locally.
Yeah.
But the socket, the part that the person fits into, and I would still fight forever. That's the most important part. The fit is critical because you can walk on a well-fitting, good-fitting socket and on very basic, what we call componentry, basic feet or knees. You can still walk, but on R1 million knee the socket doesn't fit, you won't walk.
We've got a very interesting comment from one of our listeners saying that car crash statistics focus on deaths, and there are many survivors who are maimed and lose limbs and who aren't, in fact, and she's putting this, I'm assuming it's a she, putting this into inverted commas, there are many who are maimed and lose limbs and are thus not seen. I think that's a very powerful thing, because on the one hand, someone who has a prosthetic, once they have the prosthetic, they don't want to be seen because they want to be part of society and be perceived as part of society. But prior to that, they are not recognized or seen. What would your comment on that be?
I think it's 100%. You know, people that amputees, we're talking amputees now, so, when they're not mobile, they're so much more reliant on other people. So if you can't walk, the basic thing, if you're using crutches to walk, you can't open the door. You got to stop, let go the one crutch, open the door, go through the door, grab the crutch, go through. It's a simple task like that. You can't carry a cup of tea. You can't carry a mug. So you can mobilize, but you can't do anything really.
Yeah.
So it's exactly that. So then the less you can do, the more you're left out of society. So people want to go somewhere, you think, I'll be a burden, I won't go with them.
Yeah.
And you just get left behind more and more and more.
Have you ever worked with young teenagers and seen them do crazy things afterwards?
Crazy stuff. I mean, we've had kids that have come in and just, basically these above knee amputees skateboarding. I mean, it's so crazy to think that some of the prosthesis and above knee can go skateboarding.
Yeah.
You know, there's a chap in and also people also achieve things without the prosthesis sometimes. There's that young chap in Cape Town, I want to name names, that had a shark attack.
Yes, that's right. We've interviewed him.
He's back doing surfing. You know, he's surfing again and things like that. We have a patient now with above knee amputation that circumnavigated Lake Kariba on a mountain bike. You know, and you don't even hear about those people. They just do their thing. And the Paralympics is great. And I mean, it creates awareness, and the people are amazing athletes. But there are hundreds of people just going about their daily lives that, not looking for recognition. They're just doing it because it's an interest.
Allan, I want to say thank you so much for making the time with us. An absolutely fascinating conversation, as one of our listeners say. And I would agree, a lot to learn from you as well. Allan Oates is a medical orthotist, prosthetist, and he's a partner at something called Barkley and Oates, working with young children, adults, and 80-year-olds, upwards all the way, talking about prosthetics. What are those three areas that are most critical? One, the person who makes the prosthetic. Two, how the foot, the knee, the elbow, and the hand works, and ultimately the attachment to the body. How does that work in its very best?